Hello, everyone. I'm National Journal editor Kirk Beto here for another exciting edition of Decision Desk HQ's Let Me Finish. Joining me today is our expert panel of Liberty Vittert, the professor of data science at Washington University St. Louis. Liberty, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm coming off covering the Democratic Convention in Chicago right now, so I'm going off about 3 cumulative hours of sleep over the last 5 days. So this will be a joy to be a part of here. Also joining me is Brandon Finnegan, co-founder of Decision Desk H2. Q, Brandon, how are you doing?
Yes. So
I think that's about how we're all feeling right now here. You know, the convention this week capped off a pretty crazy month. You know, it was a month and 2 days ago that Biden stepped down. You know, in that time, we've had Kamala take the nomination. You've seen her close the polling gap on Trump here. And I wanted us to take a pause here at the top of the show here for Brandon to run through kind of the latest averages that we're seeing from our friends over at Decision Desk HQ. Brandon, can you walk us through kind of the latest averages?
of course, and of course, for people who are watching this right now, the averages will change. So by the time you're watching this broadcast, best way to see the latest averages is, of course, to go to the Hill and Decision Desk, where we have those broken down both nationally and by state. Our current average right now, it has Harris up by about 3.2 points over Trump, and the 49.2 over 46 for the national number. State by state breakdown, we're talking a 1/10 of a point lead for Trump over Harris in the average in Arizona, about a point lead for him in Nevada, about a 2.7 point lead for him in Georgia, 1 point lead for Harris in North Carolina, 1.9 in Michigan, just under a point in Pennsylvania, and about a 3-point lead in Wisconsin. So it's important to keep in mind this is happening while the Democratic National Convention is concluding. You know, this is still in that first few weeks of rollout for Kamala Harris and her campaign, her presidential campaign. This is also to keep in mind that 4 years ago at this point, these numbers are considerably better for Trump. We're looking at Harris leading Trump right now in national polling averages. I do always stress to people to look at the margins as well, not to look at the margins, but to look at the vote share that each candidate seems to be holding and what that looks like over the course of the campaign. So right now, Trump is, behind Harris in an average in Pennsylvania by about a point, but he's polling at a 47.5 point margin, or 47.5 point vote share, which is substantially higher than what he was receiving in polling in 2020 and in 2016. He's polling stronger in these state-by-state averages overall than he was in either of his two previous campaigns. She just happens to be getting a higher share right now currently in the polls that are being released. But as I had stressed in previous recordings, I really hope that people don't take these polls, every time they're dropping as if they're just, manna. It's manna from heaven. You need to wait until after Labor Day to see how things settle, where things are going to stick or not stick for her in her rollout, and for Trump for whatever he's trying to do to bring those numbers back up for himself and pull her numbers down. But that's what we're looking at right now. And I guess we can open up the discussion here about how both of you feel about the state of play right now, at least in what we're seeing with the polling data.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask Liberty this here real quick. And Brandon, to your point, we're coming up on that Labor Day deadline where we should really start keying in a little bit more to the polls here right now. Liberty, in this last few days here, have we seen any more shift toward Harris? It seems like away from Harris now that more people are getting to know her. This is a big introduction here. You see some of these candidates that the more they get introduced, the more people know about them. Their polling starts to take a slip. Look at J.D. Vance, for example, after he got the VP nomination. What are we see? What type of movements have we been seeing over the last 2 weeks or so leading into the Democratic convention?
Well, Kirk, I know you said before we started the show when we were talking about looking at polls, do as I say, not as I do. Like, we all look at the polls, whether we're supposed to or not. And I mean, I think what we can see so clearly is J.D. Vance, as you said, his favorability rating went down 12 points after he was introduced. The more people got to know him, the more they didn't like him. But the opposite is what we're seeing with somebody like Walz. I mean, even anecdotally, you were at the convention. I mean, you saw there's hardcore Republicans who are saying, well, I don't know, I kind of like Coach Walz. Like, it was hard not to like him after his talk. And whatever his fumbles have been since he came out, we have not seen the dip in favorability that Vance had. So, for example, the stuff that Republicans were trying to make a big issue, like the stolen valor, has not hurt him in the same way that, for example, the childless cat ladies has hurt Vance.
Brandon, I wanted to ask you here and get your thoughts on this right now. We've seen in more traditional campaigns, and this campaign has been anything but traditional, a sort of post-convention bump usually after the nominating contest here. What was interesting about this cycle is that we didn't see that with Trump, that he's got that really hard ceiling still of about 47, give or take a tenth of a point there in a lot of these states. And even after the assassination attempt as well, we didn't see his numbers go up. We just saw Biden's just crater after that debate. Harris seems to have been on this upward trajectory for a little bit now. We haven't seen it necessarily plateau yet. Do we expect this momentum to continue or supercharge now that she's had the convention? Are we going to see kind of a post-convention bump, or are we taking all of the iconography right now and throwing that out the window?
Well, I don't say throwing out the window, but Harris has enjoyed a spike in her numbers during a rollout. Usually the convention is the rollout, but she's had that now for several weeks. And I think we underestimate the effect for a lot of Democrats who were just so in despair over Biden being their nominee and what the conditions were looking like, what the polling was looking like, that they were going to be the group that was going to rebound the most immediately when they had flipped the candidacy over, when Kamala became the nominee. And we've seen that already. So I think that's priced in. Now, can she grow a little bit more because of the televised convention and how that kind of percolates down? Yeah, she might get a point or two more of a bump from where she is right now. But you're not going to see a skyrocketing, you're not going to see these huge spikes we've seen in some of these elections in the past, because that might have happened if this had happened just like in the last couple of days. Biden dropped out and this happened, but this has been kind of building now for several weeks. Her favorability numbers have improved over where they were just before Biden dropped out. We haven't seen them continue to just keep climbing and climbing. There is going to be a certain wall people will hit. We are in a very divided country, politically speaking. So she's only going to get but so high in her favorability ratings, just like Donald would only get so high in his favorability ratings. I don't expect it to go much higher for her. The question is, does it start to fall back towards earth? If it does, if Donald Trump's campaign is able to start bringing Kamala Harris back down, not necessarily the numbers that existed before the switchover, but at least a couple of points off, then, again, the race is still very, very close. I understand people look at leads, they look at margin leads, they look at, to switch from this to this. We are still 80 days away from the election. This is very, very close. And again, since we vote and we pick our presidency through the Electoral College, looking at those states that are really involved, they're going to make that decision there. They're both still in the game here. If you give Trump his existing lead in Georgia, all right, he needs to flip things back over in North Carolina and carry Pennsylvania. He's president, right? 3 states. It's not a very huge picture there. For Harris, she wants to keep those numbers going the way they're going. She wants to keep her edge and advantage in some of these states, can maybe build on that a little bit to kind of push things out of reach for the former president. But it's still extraordinarily close. And I know I sound like a broken clock saying this, or broken anything you want to throw, any analogy you want to throw in there, that I keep saying the same line over and over, but it's the truth. This is a tight race now with these 2 candidates. It was not that way with Biden imploding before he was replaced. He was right up through July 21st. The Democrats could see, and they were looking into a black hole, basically, of what things are going to look like for them in November. They were going to get destroyed everywhere.
Well, now there's light at the end of that black hole. Now, whether or not that's a oncoming truck hope is another thing. And I think one of the things that Harris does have going in her favor right now is how unified this convention was over this last week. I was on here on the ground with the hotline team, And there was a lot of nervous energy in the air over the protesters that were supposed to be here. There was supposed to be at one point an estimate of 20 to 30,000 people out in the streets of Chicago protesting the Biden administration's response to the war, Israel's war in Gaza. It ended up being just a few thousand people, which, is a lot there. And the uncommitted delegates, are about roughly 30 or so, did stage press conferences, sit-ins. There was some minor disruptions out on the floor, but for the most part, the Democrats really presented a unified front. And that unified front, which I thought was interesting, seeing the speeches and seeing and talking to delegates and their reaction to it, was about kind of normalizing the ticket and introducing Harris, like you said, Brandon, that this was a rollout of a candidate here at this convention to normalize her. I think one of the standout moments to me was Tim Walz's speech on Wednesday night, where he talked about, helping your neighbor, where we took down the language from the highfalutin, Biden talked about how Trump is a threat to democracy, and speaking a little bit more to the better angels. You saw that in the Obama speeches as well. And I think the moment that's going to get replayed from this again and again isn't anything that Harris said, but it was that clip of Tim Walz's son, and Walz is talking about his family's struggles with fertility, doing IVF treatments, naming their daughter Hope, and cutting to their son who's just bawling his eyes out and standing up and going, "That's my dad." You even had some conservative Republicans issuing statements of support after some online trolls were going after him. And same thing with Harris too. It was very heavy on her biography, very heavy of being like, "This is Kamala, she's your neighbor, she's a good person right now." And I was wondering, Liberty, if I could ask you real quick here, is there any one line of attack that you might see from Republicans here that could be a little bit more effective, I guess, in cutting through that armor?
I mean, the only thing that the Republicans have really tried so far is Comrade Kamala, which isn't landing. I mean, I think most people, at least in our generation, don't even remember what a communist is. Like, there isn't that sort of, big, there's no McCarthyism here going on. So that just doesn't land. No one really cares anymore about that. What they're going to have to do is somehow go back to what her original brand is. What the DNC did, which was incredible. I mean, it's almost like magic how they've rebranded her from literally the most liberal senator in the Senate to now just the normal stepmom, prosecutor, tough on crime, tough pro-freedom woman next door. So somehow, I mean, they have done a masterful job at rebranding her. And the only way I think the Republicans are going to be able to get a line of attack is to go back to the issues of how she is so incredibly and sort of so far to the left in her record.
Brandon, did it surprise you while you were watching some of the speeches at home how much lighter it was on like specific policy proposals? Harris did have that speech in North Carolina before she came here where she kind of laid out her economic policies. Did it surprise you at all that was not a big part of the party?
Not at all. Think about what the general think about what the plan is here for her as a candidate and what her campaign strategy is. She is trying to triangulate herself as the change candidate. She's the vice president of an incumbent, and their party's in control of the White House right now. But yet she's trying to, on two fronts, first contrast herself with Trump. She also wants to contrast herself or provide some distance between herself and Biden, because Biden still is not, even with him dropping out, they thought, oh, it was a good decision for him to do. His favorability ratings haven't really skyrocketed back up. He's still not very favorable in the country right now, right? And she needs to make sure that she can provide some type of distance for herself. The best way to do that is not by highlighting what your concrete ideas are. It's by not doing that, by not actually putting anything, no chips on the table, nothing. By your opponent has clear ideas of what they want to do, and they've articulated those ideas. By not actually pushing yourself into any particular bucket, not dropping your balls in a bucket where people can go, aha, see, she believes this, she believes this, she believes this. You can deny it. You can deflect from it. There's nothing you've said that this is exactly what I'm planning to do. Now, the more that she does do that, where she does have some policy rods, those provide some opportunities for Republicans to attack her on it. But if she's staying deliberately vague from here to Election Day, that task of nailing her down on recent statements becomes a lot harder.
Well, and look, North Carolina played a pretty prominent role in the final night of the convention. You had Roy Cooper who had the primetime spot. Democrats are making a real push into North Carolina. It's like she's playing the old school North Carolina four corners offense here, trying to run out the clock a little bit here. Liberty, let's pivot here a little bit. After the last day of the convention, we have some big news about third-party candidates. RFK Jr. is dropping out and endorsing Donald Trump. What is your immediate reaction, and how does this affect the race heading into the general election?
Well, I think this has been one of the big discussions in the past couple of days. Is RFK Jr. going to drop out, and who's going to endorse? And he obviously is endorsed Trump. I think really what you have to think about this is what is going to stop Kamala's momentum. And this is the Republicans' Hail Mary, if you will, to the pin in her balloon for the momentum. Whether it actually does that or not, I think we have to think about that.
But would they... I'm trying to get into the profile of an RFK Jr. voter here. Are they immediately going to jump to Trump, or would they just go to another third-party candidate? Maybe it's Cornel West. Maybe it's Jill Stein. Maybe they're writing in, Ralph Nader or something. Is there any other? Are they all going to move in a monolith, I guess?
I mean, Brandon knows these numbers better than I do, but I mean, they don't tend to move in a monolith, but it definitely, given what? I mean, he was at RFK Jr. was at 10% before. Now he's at what, about 5%? I think it'd be easy to say that could be a 1% switch of people. Not everybody will. But again, with races this close, 1% matters. But Brandon knows better than I do about these specific numbers.
When Biden stepped aside for re-election and Harris took things over, you did see a drop in RFK's vote share. And that was the voters that were already inclined to maybe vote Democratic if it was a different option, and they slid all right on over to her. So we saw that happen already. I would suspect that a considerable portion of the remaining RFK vote will go to Trump, but the existing RFK vote is so small now that if you have a lot of pox on both their houses, voters that are pulling for FK, they could go for third party or not vote at all. So the question is how much of that vote, what it'll make a difference. I think it could be like half a point to maybe a point, which would lift him up in certain states where it's hyper close. But again, really, when we're looking at these polls and these averages, and we're talking about polling for a lead in a state of a point or less, it's not a lead. It's just there. It's a mathematical artifact that could just be blown over in the wind. So it could be substantial in the very, very end if these states end up being as close as they were in 2020 and 2016, where they're decided by 10, 20, 30,000 votes. Maybe it does matter in that state, in Arizona or Pennsylvania or Georgia. But I would suspect that there's going to be larger factors at play. If we see the dynamic change again, there'd be larger factors at play, the unknowns. If some crazy economic issue or an international problem that makes people decide to change their minds again, that's probably going to have a much bigger impact on the dynamic of the race than RFK dropping out.
Brandon, that is a great point, and we're running up on time, so I want to leave that there right now. I want to thank our panelists here today. I want to remind our audience that for all the latest polling data, which you should start paying attention to even closer very soon, we're coming up on that Labor Day deadline, please visit Decision Desk HQ. And wanted to remind everyone else as well, we're on the final push for the election, which means we're getting closer and closer to election night. And we will be here with you all, live streaming on election night with the results from everything from the White House, the outhouse, the dog house. We are going to be following every race up and down the ballot. And we hope that you join us on election night, November 5th, as some pretty smart people get together to digest and analyze the latest results. And until we upload again, I'm Hotline's Kirk Beto, and we will talk to you all again very soon.